A welcome, dear subscribers and curious listeners of my channel. Today, I want to tell you about strange and sometimes downright absurd differences between the Harry Potter films and the books. Get comfortable. It's going to be interesting. Number 1, unjustified aggression. Let's begin with one of the most talked about scenes in the entire saga, Dumbledore's behavior in the Goblet of Fire. If you've ever seen the meme, "Did you put your name in the Goblet of Fire?" then you already know what this is about. In the film, Dumbledore literally bursts into the hall, grabs Harry by the collar, and nearly yells in his face, "Harry Potter, did you put your name in the Goblet of Fire?" However, in the book, things were completely different. Rowling specifically described Dumbledore's reaction as calm and composed. Dumbledore approached Harry and quietly asked, "Did you put your name into the Goblet of Fire?" The difference is striking. Instead of a wise mentor, the film gives us an agitated man, seemingly ready to punch a teenager. Many fans still wonder why director Mike Newell decided to turn the gentle wizard into an irritated interrogator. This scene contradicts the character's very essence so much that it became a symbol of all the film's questionable deviations from the books. Number 2, under the blanket doesn't count. One of the most noticeable inconsistencies occurs in the opening scene of The Prisoner of Azkaban. Harry sits in bed under a blanket, casting Lumos Maxima to illuminate his textbook. The scene seems harmless and even cute, a typical teenager secretly studying magic. But then a question arises: why didn't the Ministry of Magic send him a warning owl? After all, Harry is performing underage magic in a Muggle household. According to the rules of the Potterverse, the trace detects spells cast in Muggle-inhabited areas. Yet here, no reaction at all. In the book, things make much more sense. Harry really did study at night, but he didn't use magic, and he wrote his summer essays under a blanket with a flashlight. No spells, no magic, and therefore no owl from the Ministry. The film, however, blatantly breaks the established logic of the wizarding world. Apparently, if you do it under the blanket, it doesn't count. Number 3, Hermione got prettier. It's no secret that Hermione in the movies differs significantly from her book counterpart. Emma Watson is a brilliant actress and her portrayal became iconic. But the films definitely made the character prettier than Rowling intended. In the books, Hermione is described as having bushy hair and rather large front teeth, which often made her a target of mockery. Draco Malfoy called her horse-faced and beaver girl. For a moment she looked like a beaver, but the teeth kept growing past her lip and down to her chin. Later, Madame Pomfrey treated her, and Hermione, seizing the opportunity to seldom, made her teeth a bit shorter than before. This moment was completely cut from the films, and although Emma Watson did try wearing fake teeth in early production, the idea was abandoned quickly because it made it difficult for her to speak. Her hair transformation also followed a cinematic trajectory, from wild and frizzy in the first movies to perfectly styled in the later ones. In the books, this kind of polish is mentioned only twice: at the Yule Ball, where Hermione first appears truly beautiful, at Bill and Fleur's wedding, where Harry notes that she looked stunning. In the films, however, she looked well-groomed almost all the time. Because of this, the contrast is lost. In the book, everyone was astonished by her transformation. In the movie, it just feels like another nice dress-up scene. Number 4, a love for metal. Now to a detail not everyone knows. In the books, Alastor Mad-Eye Moody had a wooden leg, whereas in the movies, it suddenly became metal. Harry caught sight of a carved wooden leg ending in a clawed foot. A small thing? Maybe, but such little things create atmosphere. The wooden leg made Moody feel like an old-school war veteran, a dark wizard hunter, living in a world of raw magic, not machinery. The film, however, turned him into a near cyborg with a metal leg and spinning eye, a touch of steampunk flair. It looks visually striking but makes the character feel less magical and more mechanical. Number 5, a symbolic gesture. Finally, let's talk about the ending of the Deathly Hallows. Harry defeats Voldemort, becomes the master of the Elder Wand, the most powerful artifact in existence, and breaks it in half, tossing it into the abyss. The scene looks cinematic and symbolic, but in the book, it's far deeper and more logical. There, Harry doesn't destroy the wand, he uses it to repair his own old wand, the holly one with the phoenix feather core. "Reparo!" said Harry, and his wand was whole again. Red sparks flew from its tip. Only afterward does he decide to return the Elder Wand to Dumbledore's tomb, hoping that if he dies a natural death, never defeated, the wand's power will fade away. If I die a natural death, like Ignotus, its power will be broken. The cinematic version feels powerful but strips the moment of logic and meaning. Harry ends up without any wand at all, and a deeply philosophical reflection on power and responsibility turns into a simple act of destroy everything. Number 6, where is Percy? Percy Weasley's story in the books is one of pride, guilt, and redemption. A quiet tragedy hidden beneath the chaos of war. Once the rule-following prefect, he slowly drifts from his family, choosing loyalty to the ministry over loyalty to blood. When he calls his father an embarrassment to the ministry, it breaks something inside the Weasley home. For years, he ignores his mother's letters and refuses to attend family gatherings, but in Deathly Hallows he walks back through the doors of Hogwarts, tears on his face, whispering, "I was a fool." It's not just an apology, it's a confession. And when Fred dies, moments later, in his brother's arms, Percy's grief is unbearable. Rowling writes, Percy was shaking his brother, calling his name, and Fred's face was peaceful and still. So that image stays with you. The films erased all of it. No rebellion, no shame, no forgiveness. Percy simply appears among the fighters as if nothing had happened. Viewers who never read the books wouldn't know that one of the most powerful arcs in the entire series, A Son's Fall and Return, was lost. His redemption gave weight to the final battle, showing that even fractured families could heal before the end. Without it, the war in the films feels smaller, missing one of its most human victories, the moment when pride finally bows to love. Number 7, Ginny. Nothing like in the book. Book, Ginny Weasley burns with life. She's quick with comebacks, brave on the Quidditch field, and never afraid to challenge Harry himself. When Michael Corner annoys her, she snaps back without hesitation. When Ron tries to scold her for dating, she bites back. "You're one to talk." She's fierce, funny, and confident, a mix of her brother's wit and her own fire. In Half-Blood Prince, when Harry finally kisses her in front of everyone, the book describes it as natural, electric, inevitable. It was as though someone had set off a firework in his chest, Rowling writes. Their relationship feels earned, built on years of friendship, courage, and mutual respect. In the films, that spark disappears. Ginny becomes quiet, restrained, almost fragile. Gone are her jokes, her bravery, her bite. Instead of the fiery girl who flew into battle, we get awkward silences and shoelace scenes. The chemistry between her and Harry feels forced, not like two equals finding each other. Without her wit and strength, Ginny's love story loses its soul. The girl who once hexed boys for teasing her becomes a shadow in the background. The book gave us a lioness, the film left us with an echo. Number 8, The Forgotten House Elves. In the films, house elves appear as little more than side characters. We know Dobby, the brave one who saves Harry, and Creature, the bitter one who changes his heart. But in the books they are part of something bigger, a hidden world of servitude and forgotten labor that Hermione Granger refuses to ignore. In Goblet of Fire, after seeing elves working in Hogwarts kitchens, she creates SPEW, the Society for the Promotion of Elfish Welfare. Everyone laughs at her. Ron calls it spew. Harry rolls his eyes, but Hermione doesn't stop. It's one of her most defining acts of courage, the courage to fight for those who can't fight for themselves. The films completely erase this storyline. Without SPEW, Hermione loses a vital piece of her personality. She becomes only the smart one, not the activist who dares to question her world. In the book, she argues passionately, house elves get paid nothing and have no holidays, right? And they don't even want to be free because they've been brainwashed. That line captures everything about her character. Empathy mixed with frustration. The kind of moral fire that makes her more than a student with good grades. By removing this plot, the films also dulled the emotional bond between Hermione and Dobby. In the book, her admiration for him isn't random. It grows from years of defending his kind. When Dobby dies in Deathly Hallows, the loss hits harder because Hermione, of all people, truly understood what his freedom cost. On screen, we lose that depth. We see Dobby's sacrifice, but not Hermione's fight for justice. And without that fight, the wizarding world feels a little less real and a little less human. Number 9, the theft from the twins. In the films, Fred and George Weasley's joke shop seems to appear out of thin air, a colourful explosion in Diagon Alley with no story behind it. One moment they're mischievous pranksters throwing fireworks at Dolores Umbridge, and the next they own a thriving business. No explanation, no emotion, no struggle. But in the books, the creation of Weasley's Wizard Wheezes is one of the most heartfelt subplots in the series, a story of friendship, courage, and quiet generosity. After the Triwizard Tournament, Harry wins 1,000 galleons. It's blood money, a reward he never wanted, tied to Cedric Diggory's death. So he decides to do something meaningful with it. Rowling writes, "Take it, buy your joke shop, do what you're best at." He hands the gold to Fred and George through Ron, making him promise not to tell anyone. It's such a small, human gesture, and yet it changes everything. The twins go on to build their dream, a place of laughter in the darkest time of the war, all because Harry believed in them when no one else did. The films miss this completely. They never show Harry's choice, his generosity, or his deep bond with the Weasley twins. That single moment reveals more about his character than any battle scene. He's not just the chosen one, he's the boy who gives away his fortune to make someone else's dream come true. In a world full of dark magic, that act of kindness was real magic, and it deserved to be remembered. Number 10. Fleur without character. Fleur Delacour was never meant to be just a pretty face. In the books, she is fire wrapped in grace, proud, ambitious, and unafraid to speak her mind. When she arrives at Hogwarts for the Triwizard Tournament in Goblet of Fire, she doesn't come chasing attention. She comes to prove that witches can be just as strong, just as daring as wizards. "I am not a little girl," she snaps at Ron after he mocks her accent. She earns her place as a champion not through charm, but through courage. The Fleur we read about burns brightly. The Fleur we see on screen barely flickers. In the films, Fleur is reduced to a background decoration. Her lines are few, her presence fleeting. She is mostly shown brushing her hair, gasping or holding someone's hand. The film version of Goblet of Fire turned her from a determined champion into a damsel constantly in distress. During the second task, when she fails to save her sister, the book shows her broken-hearted and furious with herself. In the film, the emotion barely registers before the scene cuts away. What was supposed to reveal her compassion and guilt instead turns her into a side note in her own story. Her depth becomes clear only later in Half-Blood Prince, when she stands by Bill Weasley after Fenrir Greyback's attack. Molly Weasley doubts her, thinking she only loved Bill for his looks. Fleur's answer slices through the room like a spell. "I think he is still beautiful," she says fiercely, "because I love him for who he is, not what he looks like." It's one of the most human moments in the entire series. Love without vanity, devotion without condition. But in the film, it's barely a line said without fire. The emotion that made readers fall in love with her is lost in translation. Imagine that scene with the full weight it deserves. The chaos after the attack, the Weasleys whispering in doubt, Fleur's voice trembling with rage and tenderness. It could have redefined her character for every viewer. Instead, the films left her trapped behind the mask of beauty. Elegant, kind, but hollow. The Fleur from the books fought to prove herself. The Fleur from the films never got the chance. Number 11, the Lavender Brown casting mystery. Lavender Brown's story in the films is one of the strangest examples of inconsistency in the entire Harry Potter series. In Prisoner of Azkaban and Goblet of Fire, she appears briefly as a background student, played by a black actress. No one paid much attention then. She had no lines, no major scenes. But by the time Half-Blood Prince arrived, Lavender suddenly became a major character, the new girlfriend of Ron Weasley. And with that promotion came a complete change of face. The role was recast with Jessie Cave, a white actress with blonde curls and a cheerful giggle. The change didn't go unnoticed. Fans quickly compared screenshots from earlier films, realizing that the same Lavender Brown had been portrayed by at least 2 different actresses of color before being replaced. The studio gave no explanation. The books themselves never described Lavender's appearance in detail. Rowling only mentioned her name among the Gryffindors. So when the character finally stepped into the spotlight as Ron's love interest, the sudden decision to lighten her appearance left an uncomfortable question hanging in the air. Was this creative choice, or quiet erasure? In Half-Blood Prince, Lavender becomes a source of comic relief and jealousy. Her overly dramatic affection, Wun-Wun, and her obsession with Ron are played for laughs. But in the book, there's more to her than that. Rowling describes how Lavender's heartbreak after Ron's poisoning scene is genuine, not just silly infatuation. When Hermione says coldly, "She must be feeling miserable," the reader feels a sting of sympathy. Lavender is still a teenager, still human, and her emotions have weight. The films, however, flatten her into a stereotype, the clingy, blonde girlfriend. The irony is that keeping her original look could have made the story richer. A confident, witty, dark-skinned Lavender would have stood out even more beside Ron's awkwardness, adding freshness and depth to their short-lived romance. Instead, what we got was another forgettable love subplot and a casting decision that still sparks debates. Lavender's transformation from background student to pale caricature wasn't just a visual change, it was a lost opportunity for authenticity, color, and character. Number 12, the missing death scene. In the book, the deaths of Remus Lupin and Nymphadora Tonks come quietly, but hit like a thunderclap. After the chaos of the Battle of Hogwarts, Harry walks through the Great Hall and sees their bodies lying side by side. The text says, Remus and Tonks, pale and still, apparently sleeping under the dark, enchanted ceiling. He realizes that their son, Teddy, will grow up without parents, just as he did. That single line carries more weight than any spell in the story. It is the circle closing, the tragedy repeating itself, and yet there is peace in their stillness. The film gives this moment barely a heartbeat. We only glimpse their bodies in the background as the camera sweeps across the hall. No words, no close-up, no final look from Harry. If you blink, you miss it completely. The viewer feels nothing, not because the loss isn't real, but because the film refuses to let us feel it. Lupin and Tonks, characters we followed for years, fade out like extras. In the book, their deaths mean something. Lupin was the last of the marauders, the living memory of Harry's father. Tonks was the brave, clumsy young auror who dared to love a man the world called cursed. When they fall, it isn't just 2 more casualties, it's the end of an era. As McGonagall later says, they died for the same cause James and Lily did, and Harry finally understands what real sacrifice looks like. Imagine if the film had given us even one short scene, Harry kneeling beside them, his hand trembling, as he looks at the faces of the 2 people who once laughed with him. A quiet moment, no music, just silence and breath. That's all it needed. Lupin and Tonks deserved a farewell, not a camera pan. Because in the books, their love and their death remind us of the truth Dumbledore once whispered. Do not pity the dead, Harry, pity the living, and above all, those who live without love. Number 13. The true role of Draco. In the movies, Draco Malfoy often feels like a shadow of what he truly is in J.K. Rowling's books. A spoiled aristocrat sneering at Harry and flaunting his father's influence. He seems to exist merely to taunt the heroes, to serve as a reminder of the petty cruelty of childhood. But in the books, Draco is not a simple antagonist. He is a tragic reflection of what happens when a boy is raised in an environment poisoned by ideology and fear. His arrogance is a mask, his cruelty a learned behavior, and beneath it all lives a boy who was never allowed to choose who he wanted to be. Rowling crafted him not as a villain, but as a prisoner of his own bloodline, and by the time the 6th book arrives, the walls of that prison begin to collapse around him. In Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, Draco's arc becomes one of the most psychologically rich in the entire series. Rowling plants small, deliberate signs of his breakdown, his pale face, his trembling hands, the way he withdraws from his friends. At first, Harry sees only the outward arrogance and secrecy, believing that Draco has joined Voldemort's ranks with enthusiasm. But as the story unfolds, Rowling lets readers glimpse the cracks forming in the boy's facade. When Harry spies on him in the train, Draco's voice trembles as he speaks of his mission. He tells his friends that he might not return to Hogwarts the next year, and for a brief moment his fear bleeds through his pride. The reader begins to understand that this boy is not driven by hatred alone. He is being consumed by the terror of failure and the unbearable pressure to meet expectations he never asked for. Rowling shows Draco's descent into despair through subtle physical and emotional cues rather than grand gestures. The text describes him growing paler and thinner as the year goes on. Even Professor Snape remarks that he looks ill. He begins to cry in the bathroom, one of the most haunting scenes of the book, and the reader witnesses the collapse of his mask. When Harry bursts in and casts the Sectum Sempra curse, Draco is not an enemy in that moment, but a terrified boy, bleeding and sobbing on the floor, utterly lost. Rowling writes, "Blood spurted from Malfoy's face and chest as though he had been slashed with an invisible sword." The brutality of that moment is shocking, because it strips away every illusion of superiority or control Draco ever had. He is revealed not as a bully, but as a child who has been forced into a war that he cannot possibly win. In contrast, the film adaptation treats this entire emotional breakdown as a side note. The bathroom scene, while visually powerful, lasts barely a few moments. The camera lingers more on Harry's shock than on Draco's terror. The complexity of his fear, the trembling hands, the isolation, the growing paranoia is reduced to a brief flash of guilt. The audience never sees him truly unravel. Tom Felton's acting captures hints of it, the hesitations, the haunted eyes, but the script gives him almost no room to explore. The depth Rowling gave him, by removing the long, slow unraveling of Draco's mental state, the films turn him back into the stereotype he was never meant to be, the elegant bully who sneers until he fades into irrelevance. The tragedy of Draco's sixth-year mission lies not in his failure to kill Dumbledore, but in what that task reveals about him. In the book, every step of his plan is described with nervous precision. He repairs the vanishing cabinet in secret, spends sleepless nights in the room of requirement, and grows increasingly desperate. Rowling writes he was alone, terrified, and yet determined to see it through. His attempts to kill Dumbledore, the cursed necklace, the poisoned mead, are clumsy and born of panic rather than malice. Each failed attempt adds another layer of dread, until the reader almost wants him to confess, to beg for help, to escape the crushing expectations of the Dark Lord and his family. The film condenses all of this into a montage, losing the slow suffocation that makes the book so powerful. We never feel the tension of Draco's nightly vigils, the despair when his attempts fail, the growing certainty that he is being watched and judged by forces far beyond his control. In Rowling's pages, the reader can practically feel the walls closing in around him. She makes it clear that Voldemort's command to kill Dumbledore is not an opportunity, but a death sentence, not just for Dumbledore, but for Draco's innocence. The boy who once boasted of being a Death Eater's son begins to realize what that title truly means. Draco's most human moment comes at the astronomy tower. In the film, he confronts Dumbledore, wand shaking, tears in his eyes, but the moment feels brief, almost cinematic in its efficiency. In the book, however, the scene unfolds like a slow-motion tragedy. Rowling gives Draco voice and vulnerability. He tells Dumbledore, "I've got to do it, he'll kill me, he'll kill my family." Those words are not the confession of a murderer. They are the plea of a child trapped between two impossible choices. Dumbledore's calm compassion in that moment, his willingness to help Draco to protect his family, exposes the moral heart of the story. For the first time, Draco faces someone who does not see him as a Malfoy or a Slytherin, but as a frightened boy who still has a choice. Number 14. The Missing Potion Riddle. In the final stretch of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, when the trio descends into the dungeons beneath Hogwarts, readers of the book experience a sequence that feels like a pure embodiment of the magical and intellectual spirit of J.K. Rowling's world. The traps and trials designed by the professors each test a different quality: courage, intelligence, loyalty, and magical skill. Readers are carried through the Devil's Snare from Professor Sprout, the Flying Keys from Professor Flitwick, and the Deadly Chess Match from Professor McGonagall. But after Ron sacrifices himself on the chessboard, the book gives us one final brilliant test that never appears in the film: the potion riddle created by Professor Snape. It is this missing puzzle that exposes one of the most significant differences between the movies and the books: the way they portray Hermione Granger's mind. In Rowling's version, after Ron is left behind on the chessboard, and Harry and Hermione move on, they find themselves in a cold, dark chamber filled with flickering blue flames. On a stone table, 7 bottles of varying shapes and sizes stand in a line. There's a piece of parchment beside them, containing a riddle written in elegant handwriting. The test is not about wandwork or magical creatures. It is about reasoning, deduction, and logic, something wizards rarely practice. Hermione reads the riddle aloud, her voice trembling not from fear, but from excitement. She quickly realizes that this challenge is uniquely hers. The text on the parchment begins with the line, "Danger lies before you while safety lies behind. 2 of us will help you, whichever you would find." It continues to explain that among the 7 potions, some contain poison, some are harmless. One allows you to move forward through the black flames toward the Philosopher's Stone, and another lets you go back through the purple fire to safety. As readers, we watch Hermione's mind at work. Calm, methodical, brilliant. She counts, compares, deduces. There are no spells, no explosions, no flying creatures. There is only thought, and this is what makes the moment so powerful. Hermione Granger, often portrayed as the overachiever or the rule follower, suddenly becomes the savior of logic in a world that runs on chaos. She looks at the bottles and whispers, "This isn't magic, it's logic. A lot of the greatest wizards haven't got an ounce of logic. They'd be stuck in here forever." That single line defines her more clearly than almost any spell she ever casts. It is her declaration that intellect can be just as heroic as bravery. When the film adaptation reached this scene, it was nearly gone. The audience saw Harry and Hermione pass through the black flames, but the riddle itself, the moment of logical triumph, vanished completely. The visual spectacle of the chessboard and the flying keys remained, but the cerebral elegance of Snape's potion puzzle disappeared without a trace. The filmmakers chose to focus on the grander, more cinematic moments, the fire, the motion, the physical action, leaving no room for a scene that relies purely on thought. Yet that decision subtly altered how the trio's dynamic is remembered. On screen, Hermione becomes the one who remembers spells and saves Harry from vines. In the book, she is the one who deciphers a trap that even the professors might not escape. The difference is more than cosmetic. It changes the emotional balance between the characters. In the film version, Harry's courage dominates, Ron's sacrifice shines, and Hermione appears as a capable helper. But in the novel, each of the 3 proves essential in a distinct way. Ron's strategic mind wins the chess match, Hermione's intellect solves the riddle, and Harry's heart faces Voldemort. Rowling built the trio as an equilibrium of virtues, courage, intelligence, and purity of intention. Without Hermione's logical test, that equilibrium collapses slightly. What remains is an adventure tilted toward the traditional heroic arc. The boy who faces danger, aided by companions, rather than the cooperative brilliance of equals. Imagine how visually striking that potion test could have been if filmed with the same intensity as the earlier challenges. The 7 bottles gleaming in the firelight, the reflection of blue flames dancing on the stone walls, Hermione standing still amid chaos, her mind racing as she traces invisible patterns in the air. The tension would not come from movement, but from silence. Viewers could see her thinking, calculating, narrowing possibilities. The magic would have been mental, not visual. It would have been a tribute to intelligence in a genre that so often equates heroism with action. Rowling's decision to include a logic puzzle was not random. It represented her vision of what true wizardry means. That magic alone is not enough. It is the combination of knowledge, courage, and reasoning that creates greatness. Snape, the designer of the test, embodies that duality. Known for his cruelty, he is also one of the most precise and logical characters in the series. His potion riddle reflected his mind, cold, sharp, and unforgiving. It demanded not emotional strength, but rational thought. For Hermione to conquer Snape's challenge symbolized her ability to step into the intellectual world of the adults who underestimated her. She didn't wave her wand to pass the test. She understood it. The omission of this moment in the movie quietly reshaped Hermione's cinematic identity. The film series often portrays her as the walking encyclopedia, the girl who knows the right spell at the right time, or who reads more books than anyone else. But the riddle scene showed that she is more than knowledge. She is understanding. There's a crucial difference between memorizing and reasoning. The riddle was proof that Hermione can think beyond what is written. She is not simply repeating what she read, she is applying it creatively, like a true problem solver. Without that test, the film version misses the nuance that made her extraordinary. Number 15. Neville's tragic family. Draco Malfoy's image in the Harry Potter films is one of arrogance, pride, and cold, sneering superiority. He's the blonde antagonist whose smirk defines his presence. Yet the books by J.K. Rowling reveal something far more tragic. A boy crushed by expectation, by family, and by fear. What makes this difference so striking is not simply the omission of extra dialogue or minor subplots. It is the erasure of an emotional arc that transforms Draco from a shallow bully into one of the most psychologically complex figures in the entire saga. The cinematic version gives us an enemy. The literary version gives us a victim. From his first appearance on the Hogwarts Express, the book Draco already carries more texture than the film allows. He is not merely taunting Harry, he is performing. Raised in the shadow of Lucius Malfoy, a man who worships blood purity and status, Draco tries desperately to embody what he's been told a proper wizard should be. His early arrogance is an armor. Rowling doesn't excuse it, she explains it. "You'll soon find out some wizarding families are much better than others, Potter," he says in The Philosopher's Stone. The line, read in the context of the books, reveals not just prejudice, but a child's imitation of his father's voice. In the film, however, that subtle mimicry is gone. Tom Felton's Draco is confident, almost natural in his cruelty. The boy in the book, however, is parroting beliefs he barely understands. By the time of the Chamber of Secrets, Draco's bullying becomes louder, his insults sharper. Yet Rowling plants moments that reveal his insecurity. During the dueling club scene, when Harry's unexpected ability to speak Parseltongue shocks everyone, Draco's triumph dissolves instantly into confusion and fear. He does not understand what he's witnessing, and that lack of control frightens him. The book describes him backing away eyes wide, not with awe, but with something closer to panic. The film barely lingers on that detail. Instead, the camera cuts quickly, maintaining his image as Harry's foil rather than a frightened boy confronting a world that isn't as simple as his father promised. Rowling's most deliberate unravelling of Draco begins in the Goblet of Fire, when the shadow of Voldemort's return creeps into every pure-blood household. Draco's taunts about the Dark Lord coming back read differently on the page than they play on screen. In the book, it feels like nervous boasting, words meant to mask anxiety. He has heard whispers at home, felt the shift in his parents' tone. When Lucius resumes his allegiance to Voldemort, Draco is no longer just a spoiled boy. He becomes a link in a chain of inherited duty. The films, meanwhile, keep him static, still the schoolyard tormentor, still the smirking Slytherin prince. In the Order of the Phoenix, Draco's growing alignment with the darker side of wizarding politics should mark a moral turning point. but again the films flatten it. Rowling shows him appointed as a Slytherin prefect, using his new authority to intimidate others, yet his actions always feel like imitation. He mimics power because it's the only kind he has been taught to respect. The book captures fleeting glimpses of his confusion, especially in the final scenes at the Ministry of Magic, where his father's failure devastates the Malfoy family. The humiliation of Lucius marks the first crack in Draco's confidence. The films skip this emotional aftermath entirely, reducing him to background sneers. It is in The Half-Blood Prince that Rowling finally exposes Draco's humanity in full, and this is precisely where the films falter most. When Draco receives his deadly mission from Voldemort to kill Albus Dumbledore, he ceases to be a villain. He becomes a boy trapped between impossible choices. In the book, his fear is constant, haunting, physical. He looked as though he had aged several years, Rowling writes. He isolates himself, stops sleeping, and begins to crumble under the pressure of an adult task he cannot comprehend. The film includes fragments of this, but it never allows the viewer to linger inside his torment. His trembling hands, his tears in the bathroom, these moments flash and vanish. They do not breathe. The most powerful depiction of Draco's internal collapse occurs in the bathroom duel scene with Harry. In the book, Harry's use of sectum sempra leaves Draco bleeding and terrified, and Rowling describes him as staring at the ceiling, blood gushing from his face and chest. But the emotional wound cuts deeper. Draco's horror is not only from the pain, but from the sudden realization that death is real, that he is not invincible, that this path has consequences. He was no longer the confident boy, Rowling writes. He was a frightened child. The film's version, however, plays it as a brief burst of violence and guilt for Harry, not an awakening for Draco. We lose the sense of his shattering. Later, in the tower scene where Dumbledore faces his would-be killer, the book delivers one of the most intimate moral confrontations in the series. Draco's wand trembles. He seemed to be on the verge of tears. Dumbledore, calm and kind, tells him, "You are not a killer." The words pierce him. This is the first time an adult outside his family recognizes his suffering. Rowling makes it painfully clear Draco doesn't want to kill. He wants to be saved. "I have to do it. He'll kill me," he cries, voice cracking. In the book, this is the moment where Draco's soul hangs in balance. In the film, the scene rushes past the emotional crescendo. The trembling wand is there, but the terror, the trembling heart, is not. Number 16, The Vanishing of Peeves. When the trio descended beneath the trap-door in Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, every obstacle they faced seemed designed to test one of them. It was not just a series of magical challenges, it was a quiet revelation of who they were as characters. In the book, each trial felt like a mirror, not of the body, but of the soul. The devil's snare tested calmness and knowledge, the flying keys tested dexterity and courage, the life-size chess game tested bravery and sacrifice. But after the chessboard, when Ron had already fallen, another subtler test awaited Hermione and Harry, a test that never appeared in the film, though it may have been the most telling of all. In J.K. Rowling's words, "This isn't magic, it's logic," Hermione says, as she examines the row of potions standing before the black flames. The line stands like a small manifesto in the heart of a fantasy story. Rowling deliberately places this trial at the very end, right before the mirror that hides the stone, as if to remind the reader that not every great obstacle can be overcome by spells or strength. Hermione's victory in that moment was not a burst of magical power, but a triumph of intellect and reasoning, the very tools the wizarding world often overlooks. In the novel, The room with the potions is described with eerie stillness. 7 bottles are lined up on a stone table, each containing a different liquid. Some deadly, one that will let them go forward, another that will take them safely back. Purple fire blocks the exit behind them. Black flames guard the way ahead. It is a trap designed not to be broken by force. On the table lies a small parchment with a riddle. A riddle so elegantly crafted that it feels more like something out of a Sherlock Holmes story than a tale of wizards and spells. The reader, alongside Hermione, studies the clues. One among us 7 will let you move ahead, another will transport the drinker back instead. Hermione reads the riddle once, twice, her brow furrowed in concentration. There is no spell she can cast to reveal the answer. Many of the greatest wizards haven't got an ounce of logic, she explains to Harry. They'd be stuck in here forever. This is the first and only moment in the entire series when Rowling elevates logic, human logic, above magic. And it is no accident that it is Hermione, the Muggle-born witch, who masters it. Her upbringing in the non-magical world has given her an appreciation for rational thinking that most wizards, raised among charms and potions, never had to learn. That single puzzle validates her identity, a bridge between 2 worlds. In contrast, the film adaptation skips this scene entirely. After Ron sacrifices himself in the chess game, Hermione and Harry simply rush forward. There is no table of bottles, no riddle, no flames. The audience never sees Hermione calmly analyzing danger, never watches her defeat a test that cannot be won with a wand. Instead, the camera follows Harry almost exclusively, framing him as the natural leader and chosen one. Hermione's brilliance, which in the book burns quietly but unmistakably, becomes in the film a flicker, visible but not celebrated. It is easy to see why the filmmakers made this choice. The logic puzzle is quiet. There are no special effects, no explosions, no visual excitement. On screen, 2 children reading a riddle would seem tame compared to a life-size chessboard shattering under the weight of enchanted pieces. But what was lost in spectacle was something much greater, the moment of balance that defines the Golden Trio. In the book, Rowling constructs their unity through equality, Ron's bravery and strategy, Hermione's intellect and reasoning, and Harry's instinct and moral courage. By removing Hermione's challenge, the film leaves her as a secondary figure, the clever helper, not the equal hero. This change subtly reshapes how audiences perceive Hermione. In the novels, she is never just the smart girl. She is the mind that keeps the trio alive. She is the planner, the skeptic, the one who reads before acting. The logic test encapsulates her essence. She faces danger not by force, but by understanding. Her mind becomes her shield. When she identifies the correct potion, the smallest bottle, she does it without hesitation, knowing that reason, not chance, will lead her through. It is the kind of quiet heroism that does not lend itself to cinematic flair, but defines character far more deeply than any duel. If the book shows Harry learning courage and Ron proving loyalty, it shows Hermione proving intellect, and that intellect can be just as heroic. There are safer ways of showing bravery, she says elsewhere, and it's called thinking things through. Her test in the dungeon embodies this. She faces the flames of death and chooses reason over panic. It is, symbolically, her first step toward becoming the woman who will later brew Polyjuice Potion in a bathroom and stand up to professors when no one else dares. What makes the omission even stranger is that the potion riddle is not mere filler. It's thematically essential. Each of the teachers who guards the stone designs a trial representing their discipline. Sprout's plants, Flitwick's charms, McGonagall's transfiguration through chess, Snape's potions. The logic test is Snape's creation, and that is important too. It is one of the few moments in the first book that hints at Snape's depth. The man who appears cruel and antagonistic on the surface is, in this moment, revealed as brilliant and methodical. His trap is not emotional, but intellectual, a reflection of the mind behind the menace. Without that scene, both Hermione's intellect and Snape's complexity lose a defining connection. In the film, Snape remains the sneering potions master who hates Harry. The audience never glimpses his precision or his methodical intelligence. By erasing his challenge, the movie also erases a layer of him. The result is a simpler story, cleaner, faster, but flatter. The careful architecture Rowling built in the novel, where every teacher leaves a piece of themselves in the protection of the stone, dissolves into a more generic adventure sequence. It becomes a journey of survival rather than a journey of discovery. The missing logic test also shifts the emotional weight of the ending. In the book, Hermione's success is immediately followed by her decision to stay behind. She gives Harry the potion that will allow him to pass through the flames while she drinks the one that takes her back. "You're a great wizard, Harry," she says, "but I'm better at books and cleverness." It is a statement of self-awareness, but also humility. She knows where her strength lies and where Harry's lies. In the film, this moment of equality never happens. The transition from the chess match to the final confrontation turns Hermione into a bystander, waiting at the door rather than shaping the outcome. Many readers remember the feeling of awe when they first read that scene. It was not about potions or riddles. It was about identity. It was the reassurance that intellect matters, that cleverness can save lives, that magic itself can be powerless in the face of reason. Rowling gives her young readers a profound message. Being bookish, rational, and methodical is not a flaw, it is a superpower. By removing that message, the film loses a part of what made Philosopher's Stone not just a fantasy, but a story about the mind's triumph over chaos. What makes this difference between the book and the film even more striking is how it echoes through the series. Later movies continue the pattern of simplifying Hermione's intellectual victories into visual or emotional moments. The subtle, brainy side of her character, the girl who solves ancient riddles, understands enchantments, and reasons through fear, becomes increasingly overshadowed by her emotional strength and loyalty. Admirable traits, yes, but incomplete. The potion puzzle was her origin scene as a thinker. Without it, her genius feels less grounded, more assumed than earned. Even the symbolic imagery of that trial is powerful when you look closely. Two flames, black and purple, represent barriers of death and retreat. The bottles, indistinguishable by colour or size, force her to think rather than rely on luck. It is a moment stripped of all external aids, no spells, no wands, no adults, just intellect and courage. Hermione literally drinks her decision, an act of faith in her own reasoning. That quiet sip, followed by her calm passage through fire, is more heroic than many of the film's louder spectacles. It is, in essence, the act of a true Gryffindor. Bravery born of thought, not impulse. In retrospect, the missing scene feels like a lost opportunity to show that the trio's power lies in their differences. The Harry of courage, the Ron of loyalty, and the Hermione of intellect. Each completes the other. Rowling writes them as equal pillars of friendship. The film, by omitting Hermione's trial, tips that balance. It turns her into support rather than foundation. It is subtle, but it changes how audiences grow to perceive her. The clever girl who outwitted an enchanted riddle becomes the sidekick who simply tags along. Perhaps that is why fans who read the books first often speak of the potion puzzle with reverence. It is not just nostalgia, it is recognition. In that moment, Hermione Granger is not the brightest witch of her age because others say so. She proves it, quietly, elegantly, unforgettably. And it remains one of the most unjustly forgotten moments in the adaptation, and the scene that could have shown the world that logic, just like magic, has the power to conquer fear. Number 17, Snape's Lost Past. In the world of Harry Potter, Neville Longbottom's name is often followed by a kind of affectionate smile. He is remembered as the clumsy boy who lost his toad, who stumbled through classes, who trembled under Professor Snape's sneer. But the books reveal something far more profound than the timid boy we see on screen. They reveal a child raised under the shadow of unbearable loss, carrying a wound that shaped every ounce of his courage. In the films, this truth is erased, and with it disappears one of the most moving threads of J.K. Rowling's story, the tragedy of the Longbottoms and the strength that grows from it. In the books, Neville's backstory is not a passing mention. It is an essential key to understanding his heart. Rowling carefully unwraps it piece by piece, never exploiting it for pity, but showing how pain becomes character. We learn that his parents, Frank and Alice Longbottom, were celebrated auras who fought bravely against Voldemort's Death Eaters during the First Wizarding War. They stood alongside the likes of Alastair Moody and Kingsley Shacklebolt, true defenders of the wizarding world. But their loyalty and defiance came at a cost. When Voldemort fell, his most devoted followers, Bellatrix Lestrange, her husband Rodolphus, and her brother-in-law Rabastan, sought revenge. They captured Frank and Alice, torturing them with the Cruciatus curse until their minds were destroyed. Rowling does not describe the scene directly. Instead, she lets its horror seep through memory and silence. In Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, Dumbledore tells the stunned courtroom at the trial of Barty Crouch Jr. Frank and Alice Longbottom were tortured into insanity by 4 people. The weight of those words is enormous, and yet in the films, this history never exists. Neville's parents are simply absent, never explained, never mourned. The audience sees only a boy who tries hard, but never learns why he must try so hard to begin with. The books, however, do not let us forget. When Harry, Ron, Hermione and Ginny visit St. Mungo's Hospital in Order of the Phoenix, they encounter Neville in one of the most heartbreaking moments in the entire series. He stands by the bed of his parents, both living, both gone. Alice, his mother, does not recognize him. Instead, she shuffles forward and presses something small and shiny into his hand, a wrapper from a Drubal's best-blowing gum. "Thanks, Mum," Neville whispers, pocketing it as if it were treasure. His grandmother Augusta explains that she gives him one every time, but Neville never throws them away. That image, the quiet exchange of a candy wrapper between a mother and the son she can no longer name, tells us more about Neville's soul than any duel or speech could. This moment changes how we see him entirely. Suddenly, the shy boy who forgets passwords and fumbles with spells becomes a symbol of endurance. He does not fight for glory. He fights for dignity, for the memory of what his parents once stood for. He is driven by the hope that he can live a life worthy of the ones they lost. In the film version of Order of the Phoenix, however, this entire sequence is erased. There is no hospital, no Alice or Frank, no candy wrapper trembling in Neville's hand. The story reduces him to a comic relief turned hero, skipping over the deep emotional current that defines him. Without this context, his courage at the Battle of Hogwarts seems almost random, the bravery of a background character suddenly given a spotlight. But in the novels, it is the culmination of everything he has carried. When Neville stands before Voldemort in Deathly Hallows, he is not just another student resisting tyranny. He is the son of two heroes who lost their minds to the same darkness. His defiance, "I'll join you when hell freezes over," echoes his parents' refusal to bow to the Dark Lord. Every scar on his family's past fuels that moment. Rowling deliberately contrasts Neville's path with Harry's. Both are born days apart. Both had parents who defied Voldemort 3 times. Both could have been the chosen one. But where Harry grows up loved, Neville grows up pitied. His grandmother constantly compares him to his father, reminding him that he does not measure up. His family once feared he might not even be magical. In Order of the Phoenix, we learn that when Neville was a baby, his great-uncle Algy held him out a window by the ankle in an attempt to scare magic out of him. Only when Neville bounced across the garden did they finally believe he was a wizard. Such childhood humiliation could have made him bitter, but instead it made him humble. He carries his pain quietly, never seeking attention or sympathy. This quiet resilience is Neville's true magic. The films show him growing braver, yes, but they never explain the price of that bravery. When he faces Bellatrix Lestrange in the books, the encounter carries unbearable tension. Here is the woman who destroyed his family, laughing, cruel, unrepentant. She sneers, calling him the little boy who likes to play hero. Yet Neville's response is not vengeance. It is duty. He fights not out of hatred, but out of love, the same love that keeps him visiting St. Mungo's. In Order of the Phoenix, Harry observes Neville after the battle at the Department of Mysteries and realizes that he, too, has lost something no spell can restore. In the films, this complexity fades behind cinematic shortcuts. Neville becomes the underdog, the surprise hero who kills Nagini with a single swing of the sword. It is triumphant, yes, but simplified. We see courage, not its roots. The tragedy of his parents, a story that mirrors Harry's own, but in a crueler, quieter way, is never shown. The audience never learns why Bellatrix's presence makes Neville's hand tremble, or why his gaze hardens when others speak of the war. What could have been one of the saga's most profound parallels becomes a background detail, erased for time. Even the tone around Neville's character shifts because of this omission. In the books, when he finally stands tall, the moment feels earned, the slow flowering of a boy who has lived in the shadow of grief. In the films, it feels abrupt, almost comedic. Matthew Lewis's performance adds warmth and sincerity, but without the emotional scaffolding of his backstory, the transformation seems like a cinematic convenience rather than the triumph of a lifetime. The missing scenes of St. Mungo's and the Longbottom's suffering are not just cut moments, they are the missing heart of his story. Rowling's decision to show Neville's tragedy only indirectly was an act of narrative grace. She never lets pity define him. Instead, she allows small, quiet gestures, the candy wrapper, the silence, the stubborn persistence, to reveal the immensity of his strength. In a world where heroism often means loud defiance, Neville embodies the kind that whispers. "It takes a great deal of bravery to stand up to our enemies," Dumbledore says in Philosopher's Stone, "but just as much to stand up to our friends." Neville learns this lesson long before anyone notices him. He stands up to Draco, to the Carrows, even to Voldemort. But first, he stands up to his own fear of being less than the son his parents deserved. The omission of his parents' story also strips the films of one of their most haunting moral contrasts. In the books, when we see Bellatrix laughing in the courtroom or dueling at the ministry, we remember her cruelty toward the Longbottoms. Every time she mocks another victim, we recall the hospital room, the candy wrapper, the vacant smiles of Alice and Frank. That knowledge deepens the audience's hatred for her and magnifies Neville's final act of defiance. Without it, Bellatrix becomes just another villain, her crimes generalized rather than personal. Moreover, the missing House of Neville, as fans sometimes call it, represents something larger about adaptation itself. It shows how easily cinema trims away the quiet griefs that literature holds sacred. Film must move fast. It must show, not linger. But in cutting Neville's family tragedy, it also cuts the roots of empathy that Rowling planted so carefully. It turns trauma into background noise, courage into coincidence. What was once a deeply human portrait of endurance becomes a subplot about bravery in battle. In the end, the Neville of the books is not defined by his wand, his sword, or his duel. He is defined by those small, silent hospital visits, by the boy who collects candy wrappers because it's all he has left of his mother. That gesture, so fragile and so human, turns him into one of the truest heroes of the wizarding world. He is not born chosen, he becomes worthy through grief, patience, and quiet strength. And that is what the films missed. The invisible house that built Neville Longbottom, a home filled with love, broken by war, yet still standing inside his heart. Number 18, Fred and George without Hogwarts. In the hidden corners of Hogwarts there once existed a presence that perfectly embodied the castle's soul. Unpredictable, chaotic, yet strangely endearing. His name was Peeves the Poltergeist, and though readers of Harry Potter remember him vividly, those who only watched the films never met him at all. His absence is one of the strangest omissions from the movie adaptations, a character so essential to the school's atmosphere that removing him felt like draining Hogwarts of part of its mischievous spirit. In the books, Peeves wasn't just comic relief. He was the spirit of rebellion, the laughter echoing through the stone corridors, the living reminder that Hogwarts was as much alive as its students. His disappearance from the films left a silent void, a space where chaos once danced. From the very first book, Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, Peeves announces himself with a bang, literally. He zooms through hallways, hurling chalk and shouting rhymes at terrified first years. Rowling describes him as a little man with wicked dark eyes and a wide mouth, wearing a bell-covered hat. He wasn't like the ghosts who drifted solemnly through the castle. Peeves had energy, fire, and mischief that couldn't be contained. He threw ink at students, stole hats, and loved nothing more than tormenting Argus Filch, the caretaker, who despised him with a passion. In the films, Filch still prowls the halls, muttering curses, but without Peeves, his frustration feels hollow, because his greatest nemesis never made it past the cutting room floor. What makes Peeves fascinating isn't merely his chaos, but the deeper role he plays in Hogwarts' ecosystem. The castle in the books isn't static. It breathes, shifts, and reacts. The moving staircases, the talking portraits, the enchanted suits of armor, all these give the school personality. But Peeves adds something none of those can: unpredictability. He reminds the reader that even in a place built on rules and hierarchy, magic refuses to be tamed. His antics, from dropping water balloons on unsuspecting students to sabotaging the school with ink bombs, are not just pranks. They are expressions of freedom. Hogwarts isn't a sterile boarding school, it's a living organism constantly testing those who inhabit it. Peeves is that test incarnate. When Harry first encounters Peeves, the poltergeist immediately tries to scare him by pretending to drop a walking stick on his head. Moments later, he cackles and vanishes through a wall, leaving behind a bewildered and slightly amused Harry. Rowling's text describes him as the spirit of chaos, something that even ghosts fear. The fat friar, the Hufflepuff ghost, tries to defend Peeves once, saying kindly, "He's not really evil, you know, just mischievous." It's a subtle but important detail. Peeves, for all his troublemaking, isn't malevolent. He represents a different kind of energy, not darkness, but disorder. His removal from the films stripped away the embodiment of Hogwarts' unpredictability, leaving behind a castle that felt more polished, less alive. What makes the omission even more striking is that Peeves wasn't simply an early series gimmick. His presence grows stronger with each book. In Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, during Umbridge's tyrannical rule, he becomes a symbol of student rebellion. When Umbridge tries to control every corner of Hogwarts, banning jokes, clubs, and conversations, Peeves transforms from a nuisance into a revolutionary. Rowling writes, "Even the teachers secretly cheered him on." Professor McGonagall famously gives him her approval in one unforgettable moment. "It unscrews the other way," she whispers as Peeves struggles to unbolt a chandelier to drop it on Umbridge's head. That one scene captures everything Peeves stood for. The refusal to bow to authority, the joy of defiance, and the spirit of resistance that runs through Hogwarts itself. The irony is that actor Rick Mayall, a British comedy legend known for his chaotic humour, had already filmed his scenes for Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. According to Mayall, he spent 3 weeks on set playing Peeves, floating through corridors, taunting students, and laughing uncontrollably. Yet when the final cut was released, he had been erased completely. "They cut me out, bastards," Mayall later joked in an interview, half amused, half disappointed. The decision wasn't personal. Director Chris Columbus admitted later that Peeves's scenes distracted from the film's pacing. But in doing so, the filmmakers unintentionally removed a cornerstone of Hogwarts' personality. The visual effects of floating candles and moving staircases remained, but the school lost its laughter. Fans often compare Peeves to Moaning Myrtle, the other ghost who did make it into the films, but Myrtle, for all her haunting charm, embodies sadness, not mischief. She moans in her bathroom, trapped in eternal adolescence, lonely and awkward. Peeves, on the other hand, celebrates chaos. He doesn't haunt, he performs. His energy fills the air, makes teachers nervous, and makes readers smile. By replacing Peeves with Myrtle as the main spectral figure, the films shifted Hogwarts' tone from mischievous to melancholic. They kept the mystery, but lost the madness. And the difference is palpable. In the Battle of Hogwarts, Peeves' absence from the films feels particularly jarring. In the Deathly Hallows, when the final war reaches the school, every ghost, student and teacher takes a stand. And there, flying through the air, hurling objects at Death Eaters, singing a battle song, is Peeves. "We did it. We bashed them. We Potters the one," he chants in triumph after Voldemort's fall. That moment, absurd and joyful amidst destruction, is quintessential Rowling. It shows that laughter, even in war, is resistance. The films, by contrast, end in silence and solemnity. The humour, the chaos, the living madness of Hogwarts, gone. Rowling once described Peeves as the embodiment of the school's spirit, the indestructible essence of mischief. She explained that Peeves wasn't a ghost in the traditional sense, but a manifestation of centuries of magical energy concentrated in the castle's walls. He had no past life, no tragic story. He simply was. That makes his removal even more symbolic, as if the films tried to tidy up what was meant to be untidy. The raw, anarchic humour that defined early Hogwarts life was replaced with sleek visual effects and carefully framed drama. The castle still looked magical, but it no longer felt unpredictable. When you read The Prisoner of Azkaban, Peeves' interactions with Professor Lupin and Snape offer brilliant character contrasts. He mocks Lupin by singing "Loony, Loopy, Lupin," but there's affection in his teasing. He saves his real venom for Snape, pelting him with chalk and calling him Snivelus, echoing the Marauder's old nickname. In this way, Peeves becomes an echo of Hogwarts memory, the embodiment of every prank, every whispered joke in the corridors. His taunts are more than mischief, they're oral history. The films, which prided themselves on visual spectacle, couldn't capture that invisible heartbeat. Even Dumbledore's relationship with Peeves reveals something profound. The headmaster tolerates him, never banishes him, even when Peeves floods corridors or locks doors. Dumbledore understands that Peeves is part of Hogwarts' identity. He is a poltergeist of the school, Dumbledore says in the Chamber of Secrets, implying that without the school, Peeves couldn't exist, and perhaps vice versa. The poltergeist thrives on the collective energy of young minds, their laughter, fear, and rebellion. Remove Peeves, and you remove that dynamic tension. The film Hogwarts becomes static, a set, not a character. It's no coincidence that fans who grew up reading the books describe Hogwarts as home, while film-only viewers often see it merely as a backdrop. In the books, Hogwarts reacts to emotion. It leaks magic from its stones. Peeves is that leakage personified. When Harry feels despair, the corridors seem to darken. When Fred and George unleash fireworks against Umbridge, Peeves joins in, making the rebellion feel alive. Without him, the sense of the school as a living being diminishes. He's not decoration. He's heartbeat. The saddest irony is that Peeves's chaos often brings unity. His pranks drive teachers to cooperate, students to bond, and even enemies to laugh. When he drops water balloons during exams, everyone suffers together. When he hurls chairs at Umbridge, everyone cheers. His mischief, in its strange way, levels the playing field. Everyone, from Harry to Malfoy, becomes a target, and that shared absurdity breaks the rigid hierarchies of Hogwarts life. He's the trickster who holds the world together by pulling it apart. For all his noise and nonsense, Peeves also represents something uniquely British about Rowling's writing, the tradition of the literary fool. Like Shakespeare's jesters or Dickens' eccentrics, he reveals truth through mockery. He exposes hypocrisy with laughter. When Umbridge insists that Hogwarts must be orderly, Peeves mocks her rules to dust. His laughter says what no one else dares to say. That authority, when humorless, becomes tyranny. His deletion from the films wasn't just the loss of a comic character. It was the silencing of the story's anarchic conscience. Even today, fans who revisit the books often find themselves surprised by how present Peeves was. How many times he appears, how much noise he makes. His scenes aren't filler, they colour every hallway. The absence of his bells jingling in the film corridors leaves Hogwarts eerily quiet. Without Peeves, the school's magic feels rehearsed, predictable. And yet, perhaps that's why readers still talk about him with affection. In a world of polished adaptations and CGI ghosts, Peeves remains untamed, alive only in words, but louder than ever. His disappearance from the films is more than an editing choice. It's a metaphor. The cinematic Hogwarts became grand and solemn, but the literary Hogwarts was gloriously absurd. Peeves was that absurdity made flesh, or whatever passes for flesh in a poltergeist. In the end, the story of his vanishing mirrors his own nature. Chaos can't be contained on screen. You can cut him from the footage, erase his scenes, delete his laughter, but in the minds of readers, Peeves still zooms through the corridors, cackling madly, reminding everyone that magic without mischief isn't Hogwarts at all. Number 19, Dumbledore and Grindelwald, hints that vanished. Severus. Snape's life in the Harry Potter films is reduced to a haunting silhouette, a man cloaked in mystery, forever walking the thin line between loyalty and bitterness. Audiences remember the single tear that falls as he holds Lily's lifeless body and the word that became a cultural symbol of eternal devotion, always. Yet in J.K. Rowling's books, Snape's story is not about a single word or moment. It is about a lifetime of pain, isolation, and choices that grew out of deep human wounds. His tragedy is not cinematic, but existential, not romantic, but devastatingly real. What the films offered in emotional shorthand, the books unfold in raw, relentless detail, a portrait of a man destroyed by both love and circumstance. In the books, Snape's tragedy begins long before Hogwarts. We see him as a child living on the edge of a grim, broken world. The Half-Blood Prince. Chapter The Prince's Tale reveals the tiny, neglected boy who lived in Spinner's End, a place of dirty river water and rows of dilapidated houses. Rowling describes him watching Lily Evans from afar, his thin face pale against the grime, desperate to connect with someone who could see past his tattered clothes and miserable home. His father, Tobias Snape, is a violent muggle, his mother, Eileen Prince, a witch who has given up her pride. The child grows up in a house filled with shouting, fear, and the constant sting of failure. When readers meet him through these memories, they finally understand why he built his life behind walls of sarcasm and cruelty. The films never show this house, never let us feel that smell of decay that shaped his soul. Without that beginning, the end loses much of its meaning. At Hogwarts, Snape is not the cruel master we later meet, but a young boy who clings to one fragile friendship. Lily Evans becomes his only light, not just a crush, but the symbol of everything he could never have: warmth, kindness, belonging. Rowling writes, he watched her, every movement, every expression, as though they were a precious secret. The boy who would one day become the feared potions master starts as someone who simply wants to be noticed. But the marauders, James Potter, Sirius Black, and their friends, make him their target. The books describe in painful detail how James once humiliated Snape in front of a crowd, hanging him upside down, his underpants exposed, as Lily watched helplessly. The films show a glimpse of this memory in The Order of the Phoenix, but they treat it like a quick montage, almost comic. In the novel, it's tormenting. We feel Snape's shame burning through the page. The reader doesn't just see a bullied boy. They feel the bitterness that begins to rot inside him. This is where Rowling's writing turns Snape into something more than a victim. His pain mutates into anger, and his anger into power. His obsession with the dark arts is not born of cruelty, but of survival. He wants control because life has given him none. In the books, we see how he becomes fascinated with curses, inventing spells like Sectum Sempra, which later nearly kills Draco Malfoy. It is a horrifying echo of his own life, a weapon born from pain. The films never explore this duality. They show the potions classroom, the snide remarks, the mysterious glare, but not the desperate child behind them who learned that being feared was safer than being weak. The books also show that Snape's love for Lily is far from the pure, idealized image the movies present. It is possessive, flawed, and filled with guilt. When he calls her a mudblood in front of others, it is a moment of self-destruction. Rowling makes it clear that this word shatters something sacred between them. "I don't need your help," Lily cries and walks away. The films omit this entirely, turning their bond into a tragic but innocent romance. Yet the book insists on Snape's responsibility for his own fall. His loss is not fate, it's consequence. He joined the Death Eaters not out of ideology, but because hatred had become easier than forgiveness. That choice, born of wounded pride, is what makes his later redemption so profound. Snape's journey in the books is one of penance. Every cruel act, every cutting remark hides a twisted form of self-punishment. He torments Harry not only because he sees James in him, but because he sees himself, his mistakes, his lost chances. When he says in the Deathly Hallows, "You have your mother's eyes," it is not sentiment but torture. The films repeat this line like a tender refrain, but the books make it clear. Those eyes remind him daily of the only person who ever saw him as human, and the fact that he was the reason she died. That's a pain no movie can condense into a single scene. The essence of Snape's tragedy lies in his double life. The films treat it as a clever plot twist, but Rowling writes it as a lifelong nightmare. For years he lives as a spy, hated by everyone, trusted by none. Dumbledore uses him, Voldemort manipulates him, and the students despise him. He exists in perpetual disguise, forced to pretend to serve the man who murdered the woman he loved. He was Dumbledore's man, the headmaster says, but he is also his tool. The reader witnesses how that burden corrodes him. He sacrifices not only his safety, but his very identity. The films, by contrast, give us Alan Rickman's elegant performance. Smooth, composed, magnetic. It is beautiful, but too perfect. Book Snape is not a statue. He is falling apart inside. Rowling gives Snape's final moments a brutal humanity. When he dies in the Deathly Hallows, it is not in a grand, slow-motion sacrifice, but in a dirty, panicked scene on the floor of the shrieking shack. The green eyes found the black, but after a second, something in the depths of the dark pair seemed to vanish, leaving them fixed, empty, and blank. There is no orchestral swell, no cinematic beauty, just a dying man trying to see Lily's eyes one last time. The films turn this into poetry, the books leave it as raw tragedy. Even Dumbledore's relationship with Snape is simplified in the movies. In the novels it is manipulative, complex, and often cruel. Dumbledore knows exactly how to play on Snape's guilt and love. When he asks Snape to protect Harry, it is not purely noble, it's strategic. "You disgust me," Snape tells him when he realizes that Harry must die. "You have kept him alive so that he can die at the proper moment?" It's one of the most powerful moments in the series, showing that Snape's moral awakening is not born from heroism, but from despair. The films reduce this confrontation to a line of exposition. The emotional depth, the betrayal, the horror is lost in the rush to keep the plot moving. The irony is that Snape's cruelty as a teacher, so memorable in the films, is precisely what makes him tragic in the books. His bullying of Neville, his verbal abuse of Hermione, his constant humiliation of Harry. These are not cinematic quirks, but manifestations of internalized pain. Rowling does not excuse them. Instead, she shows how trauma can twist compassion into cruelty. In the films, he's the archetypal mean professor. In the books, he's a man who never learned how to love without hurting. What Rowling achieves through Snape is a form of classical tragedy reminiscent of Greek drama. The story of a man destroyed by his own flaw. His flaw is not ambition like Macbeth's or jealousy like Othello's, but love itself. Love that turns into obsession, guilt, and finally redemption. His final act, saving Harry, protecting him for years, and dying for a boy he despised, is not the act of a saint, but of a man who can no longer bear the weight of his mistakes. "Look at me," he whispers, not because he seeks forgiveness, but because he wants to see proof that Lily's spirit lived on. The books also grant Snape something the films never truly do. In a monologue, through Harry's access to his memories, we finally enter his mind. We see not the mask, but the man. His thoughts are filled with bitterness and longing, but also integrity. He despises cowardice, values truth, and, most importantly, remains loyal even when it brings him nothing. When Voldemort kills him, he dies unloved, uncelebrated, misunderstood by all. Only after his death does Harry and the reader see the truth. The films let us admire him, the books force us to mourn him. There is also a subtle moral lesson woven through Snape's arc that the films flatten. Rowling uses him to challenge the idea of good and evil. Snape is proof that people are rarely one or the other. He is cruel and kind, selfish and selfless, brave and broken. Dumbledore says, "You must be the best of us, Severus." And in a way, he is. But it's a tragic kind of best, the kind that comes from endless suffering. The films, eager for simplicity, frame him as the misunderstood hero all along. The books deny such comfort. Snape's life is not a redemption story. It's a cautionary tale about the cost of love when it curdles into regret. By the end of the novels, when Harry names his son Albus Severus Potter, it is not a sentimental tribute. It is an act of forgiveness. Harry understands what the audience only glimpsed in the films, that Snape's love was never meant to be beautiful. It was meant to be honest, flawed, and human. And perhaps that is why the literary Snape lingers in the reader's memory longer than his cinematic reflection. The man in the movies was a mystery, the man in the books was a tragedy. And tragedies, unlike mysteries, never fade. They ache. Number 20, the too personal final battle. Fred and George Weasley were never just comic relief in the Harry Potter books. They were agents of chaos, yes, but also symbols of rebellion, creativity, and courage. J.K. Rowling built them as more than mischievous pranksters. They were visionaries who turned laughter into resistance. Yet in the films, this essential part of their identity was reduced to flickering moments, flashes of humor in the background. What made the twins so unforgettable on the page was their energy, their spark, the sense that Hogwarts itself bent and pulsed around their unstoppable drive to make magic unpredictable. That pulse is what disappears almost entirely in the movie adaptations. In Order of the Phoenix, their exit from Hogwarts was one of the most electrifying scenes in the entire series. The book described an act of defiance so grand, so wildly satisfying, that it felt like an explosion of light in a world swallowed by tyranny. Dolores Umbridge, the pink-clad symbol of control and conformity, had taken over the school, turning it into a grey, suffocating institution. Then, amid this oppressive silence, came Fred and George. Rowling writes, Fred and George had turned the corridor into a fireworks display of epic proportions. Catherine wheels of red and gold spiraled across the ceiling. Fire-breathing dragons roared in mid-air. Sparklers burst like stars. It was chaos orchestrated into art. Their farewell was not a joke, it was a revolution. The film adaptation captured this moment in only a few brief shots. We see the twins soaring through the great hall on their broomsticks, laughter echoing behind them as they release fireworks that briefly stun Umbridge. It's colourful, visually delightful, but it lasts less than half a minute. The meaning, the build-up, the glorious crescendo of rebellion is gone. In the book, their act had weight. It was symbolic, a statement that joy and humour could be acts of resistance. In the movie, it's a spectacle stripped of context, leaving only the surface shine without the emotional spark beneath. Throughout the books, Fred and George are the soul of mischief that keeps Hogwarts alive. Their shop, Weasley's Wizard Wheezes, was the culmination of years of experiments, explosions, and detentions. It wasn't just a joke shop, it was their dream, their proof that imagination could triumph over fear. Rowling described their products with such joy that readers could almost smell the smoke and hear the fizzing fireworks. Instant darkness powder, skiving snack boxes, Peruvian invisibility powder. Each invention carried the same audacity as their creators. In the films, however, this inventiveness barely flickers into existence. We see the shop briefly in Half-Blood Prince, in a bright montage sequence, but it passes like a commercial break, quick, glossy, emotionless. The essence of Fred and George in the books is freedom. They are not bound by the rules that suffocate others. From the very beginning, when they send their younger brother Ron a toilet seat from Hogwarts, they stand for joyful disobedience. But in the movies, this freedom feels muted. Their lines are reduced to quips, their scenes are trimmed, their rebellion softened. When readers imagined the twins, they felt energy, danger, and laughter all at once. The films show them smiling, but rarely burning. The difference is crucial. Rowling's twins were never background noise, they were catalysts. On screen, they became decorative. One of the reasons their book portrayal felt so alive was because Rowling used their humor as a counterbalance to darkness. During the growing threat of Voldemort, when fear seeped into every corner of the wizarding world, Fred and George became a form of light. "You don't have to be serious to be brave," their stories seemed to whisper. When Umbridge's regime made Hogwarts unbearable, their fireworks didn't just entertain, they restored hope. But the films, obsessed with pacing and visual intensity, replaced this emotional function with quick laughter. Viewers who hadn't read the books would never understand how vital the twins were to the spirit of Hogwarts itself. There's a rhythm to Rowling's description of their departure that the film ignores. The book devotes entire pages to it, building anticipation. It begins with small acts of defiance, Fred and George testing fireworks, mocking Umbridge's authority, rallying students with laughter. Then, the explosion. Fred raised his wand and the firework serpent shot straight into the air, coiling and hissing above the heads of the terrified crowd. The moment is cinematic on its own, yet it carries meaning because it is earned through pages of tension and character growth. The movie compresses this into a few visual seconds, cutting away before the emotional release can land. What makes this loss significant is that Fred and George's rebellion defines what Hogwarts represents. The castle was never merely a school, it was a living symbol of magical possibility. The Weasley twins embodied that. Their defiance was not childish, it was deeply moral. They stood up to oppression, not with violence, but with creativity. That is what makes their arc powerful. Rowling doesn't just tell us they left school, she shows us why they had to. Their departure is the ultimate metaphor. When the system becomes corrupt, true magic cannot survive within it. This subtext is completely absent from the film, which treats their exit as an amusing side scene rather than a political moment. Even their relationship with the other characters loses dimension in the cinematic version. In the books, Fred and George have emotional depth, tender moments with Ginny, witty support for Ron, and a quiet, almost paternal affection for Harry. When Harry gives them his Triwizard winnings to start their business, it's one of the most selfless acts in the series. Rowling writes, "He grinned at their astonished faces. Take it, buy yourself some brains, maybe you can invent something useful." That exchange defines Harry's trust in them, and their later success gives the gesture weight. In the films, this bond is skimmed over so lightly that casual viewers might never realize the significance of that gift. Without that emotional thread, their eventual triumph and Fred's death lose the resonance they deserve. When Fred dies during the Battle of Hogwarts, Rowling delivers the moment with devastating simplicity. Fred's eyes stared without seeing, the ghost of his last laugh still etched upon his face. It's one of the cruelest lines in the entire series because it silences the laughter that had always kept others alive. Readers felt the world dim, but the film rushes through his death almost apologetically, showing a quick shot of his body without exploring the emotional collapse that follows. There is no space for grief, no acknowledgement of what was truly lost. The boy who turned rebellion into fireworks deserved more than a passing glance. The absence of the twins' full story weakens the texture of the films, their humor, their inventiveness, their refusal to submit. These were the very elements that balanced Rowling's darker themes. Without them, Hogwarts feels colder, flatter, less human. The movies lean heavily on spectacle, but the books were built on feeling. Fred and George represented that feeling better than almost anyone else. They were the embodiment of how magic could be mischievous and meaningful at once. When they vanish from the narrative, so does the heartbeat of that idea. It's easy to see why filmmakers trimmed their story. Adapting sprawling novels into 2-hour films requires sacrifice. Yet what was lost wasn't mere comedy. It was the subversive edge that made the story breathe. The Weasley twins proved that rebellion could be joyful. They made laughter into a weapon against tyranny. Their spirit echoed through the pages long after their jokes ended. In Order of the Phoenix, after their departure, students whispered, "You can still see the marks of the fireworks on the ceiling." That line captured what the films never managed to show, that the twins' chaos left scars of hope behind. Even small details that built their identity vanished from the screen. Their coded jokes, the enchanted snowballs that hit Professor Quirrell's turban, the bewitched sweets that made people grow canary feathers, all these moments built continuity. Readers watched them evolve from playful boys to fearless entrepreneurs. The movies present them as static, frozen in perpetual adolescence. There is no sense of growth, no understanding that their laughter was crafted through trial, error, and courage. They were inventors as much as jokers, and Rowling treated their imagination as something sacred. Their shop in Diagon Alley was not just a business, it was a declaration that creativity could survive even in wartime. While other wizards hid or fought, Fred and George built something. They sold joy when the world was running out of it. Rowling described their shop windows packed with shimmering purple boxes and glowing joke wands, so bright they lit the street like lanterns. It was a refuge. The film shows the shop for a few seconds, drenched in color but hollow in feeling. It misses that deeper truth that humor, in Rowling's universe, is not frivolous. It's defiance wearing a grin. If the book showed Hogwarts as a living, breathing world, then Fred and George were its pulse. Their absence in the films makes that world quieter, more mechanical. Every great rebellion needs its poets, its jesters, its fire starters. The Weasley twins were all three. Rowling gave them words that burned, fireworks that spoke, and laughter that healed. The movies gave them a cameo, and in that exchange, something essential to the soul of Harry Potter was lost, the idea that even in darkness, joy can be the bravest kind of magic. Number 21, the prophecy that lost its meaning. In the pages of Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, a single chapter changes everything readers thought they knew about Albus Dumbledore. The wise, calm headmaster, the moral compass of Hogwarts, suddenly appears fragile, haunted, and deeply human. When Rita Skeeter publishes The Life and Lies of Albus Dumbledore, Harry and the audience are forced to question whether they ever truly knew the man who guided them through so much. Skeeter's words are poisonous, but they strike at something true. Young Albus was drawn to ideas that many would now call dark, she writes, hinting at a period of his life that Rowling paints with shades of tragedy and guilt. This revelation transforms Dumbledore's story into something grander than magic. It becomes a study of ambition, loss, and the corruption of ideals. Yet when this same story reached the screen, the depth of that conflict vanished. The film adaptation of The Deathly Hallows gives the audience only a glimpse, a few sentences exchanged in a dimly lit room between Harry and Aberforth, where the name Gellert Grindelwald passes by almost unnoticed. The filmmakers choose not to linger on it, as though Dumbledore's greatest sin were a side note, an inconvenient subplot. There is no sense of the young dreamer who once stood beside Grindelwald, imagining a world where wizards would, for the greater good, rule over muggles. Without this, Dumbledore becomes a simpler figure, a mentor, a martyr, but not a man wrestling with his own ghosts. In Rowling's text, however, that ghost never leaves him. The entire seventh book breathes with the weight of Dumbledore's past. Through Harry's perspective, we see doubt and betrayal, the newspaper clippings, the photo of the young Dumbledore with a blonde boy whose smile feels both innocent and dangerous. "He was your friend?" Harry asks in disbelief while reading Skeeter's extract. The shock is not that Dumbledore had a secret friendship, but that he once believed in something close to tyranny. Grindelwald's phrase, "for the greater good," later becomes the slogan of a dark empire, but in their youth it was the language of hope twisted by pride. The book allows the reader to feel the slow unraveling of Dumbledore's ideals the moment he realizes that brilliance and righteousness do not always walk together. The emotional center of this revelation is Ariana, Dumbledore's sister. Her story, told through fragments and conflicting testimonies, is the heart of his guilt. In the book, Aberforth recounts the fight that ended her life with raw, aching simplicity. One minute she was there, and the next she was dead. 3 wizards, 3 spells, and no one ever knew whose curse struck her. It's a moment of unbearable tragedy, 2 geniuses blinded by their vision of the future, and a young girl lost between them. Dumbledore's silence afterward becomes understandable. His endless patience and gentleness are not the marks of perfection, but the penance of a man who has already seen how ideals can kill. Rowling builds this revelation slowly, letting it reshape the reader's understanding of everything that came before. In the movie, that pain is reduced to a glance. Aberforth mutters about Ariana, Dumbledore's eyes grow moist for a heartbeat, and the story moves on. There is no sense of moral collapse, no understanding that the man Harry trusts with his life once believed in controlling others for their own good. The film chooses to protect Dumbledore's saintly image, perhaps fearing that audiences might not forgive such flaws in their hero. But in doing so, it erases what makes him great, not his perfection, but his ability to confront the darkness within himself. Rowling's Dumbledore is a man defined by contradiction. He is both the architect of victory over Voldemort and a victim of his own youthful arrogance. He understands power because he once longed for it. When he warns Harry in The Order of the Phoenix, "I cared more for your happiness than your knowing the truth," we feel the echo of a man who once valued the greater plan over individual lives. That confession carries the weight of experience. He knows what happens when one sacrifices love for ideology. because he did it once, and it destroyed his family. The films, however, reduce this to sentiment. Dumbledore's eyes twinkle, his words sound kind, but the torment beneath them never surfaces. The tragedy is that the clues to this past were always there. As early as the Philosopher's Stone, Dumbledore tells Harry it does not do to dwell on dreams and forget to live. Those words sound gentle, but to a reader who knows his history, they are heavy with meaning. They are the wisdom of someone who once did dwell on dreams, dreams of wizarding dominance, dreams that cost him his sister. In the films, the line remains, but the history behind it does not. The emotional resonance is lost because the viewer never sees the ghost standing behind those words. Even more striking is the treatment of Grindelwald himself. In the book, his shadow looms long before his brief appearance in the final chapters. Skeeter's biography describes him as brilliant, charismatic, and dangerous, and Bathilda Bagshot's memories confirm that he and Dumbledore were intellectual equals, bound by both fascination and pride. Their relationship is not painted in black and white. It's a tragedy of two minds too powerful and too young to understand the consequences of their convictions. When Dumbledore later faces Grindelwald in their legendary duel, it's not just good versus evil, it's love versus guilt, an attempt at redemption. The film barely hints at this. We never feel the emotional cost of that battle, nor the decades of remorse that follow it. Rowling uses the story of Dumbledore and Grindelwald to show that even the wisest can fall. When Dumbledore says, "In the Deathly Hallows, I was gifted, I was brilliant, I wanted to escape, I wanted to shine, I wanted glory," it's one of the rawest admissions in the series. He exposes himself completely, a confession of vanity, of the hunger for greatness that nearly turned him into the very thing he later fought. The films omit this entirely. We are left with a gentle mentor, not a man who once tasted corruption and turned back. The omission is more than a lost subplot. It changes the moral foundation of the story. In the books, Dumbledore's imperfections make him a mirror for Harry. Both are marked by loss, both tempted by power, and both forced to choose love over control. When Harry decides to face death rather than seek domination, it's not just his victory, it's Dumbledore's redemption through him. The movie, however, treats Dumbledore as already perfect. Without his fall, there can be no true rise, and the story of human frailty becomes a tale of unshakable goodness. The irony is that modern audiences now explore young Dumbledore's past through the Fantastic Beasts films, which attempt to reconstruct the very emotional conflict the original movies ignored. Jude Law's portrayal captures glimpses of the man torn between affection and duty, love and guilt. But even there, the emotional weight feels second-hand, as if Hollywood were trying to recover something it once threw away. The hints that Rowling embedded in the Deathly Hallows were richer and more subtle. Fragments of letters, reflections in conversation, the silence of a man who could not forgive himself. The most haunting moment in the book arrives when Harry meets Dumbledore in the spectral King's Cross. Here, Dumbledore finally admits his failings. "I was unfit to be trusted with power." Those words define his character. They are the reason he never became Minister for Magic, the reason he trusted others to act where he could not. The films rush through this encounter, focusing on exposition rather than reflection. The audience learns what the Hallows are, but not what they meant to Dumbledore, the temptation of ultimate control, and the moral collapse that follows such desire. Every great character in literature needs a flaw that defines their humanity. For Dumbledore, that flaw was not arrogance alone, but the inability to reconcile intellect with emotion. He sought to build a perfect world through logic and lost everything that made life worth living. Rowling crafts this with almost biblical resonance, the fall of a prophet who mistook his brilliance for destiny. The film adaptation reduces it to faint nostalgia, as if his past were merely a distant tragedy rather than the core of his soul. By neglecting the full story of Dumbledore and Grindelwald, the films stripped the Harry Potter saga of one of its most powerful truths, that even the greatest wizard can be broken by ambition. The novels invite readers to see Dumbledore not as a flawless guide, but as a man who earned wisdom through ruin. Every choice he makes, from hiding the truth about Harry's fate to resisting political power, is shaped by that early sin. When he tells Harry, "Do not pity the dead, Harry, pity the living, and above all, those who live without love," the words strike like confession. The films, elegant as they are, leave that confession unspoken. What remains in the books is a portrait of redemption, one drawn in guilt and grace, where Dumbledore's greatness is inseparable from his grief. Without that story, the silver-bearded headmaster becomes only an icon, not a man, and perhaps that is the strangest difference between the films and the novels. In Rowling's pages, Dumbledore bleeds. On screen, he only shines. Number 22, The Power of Lily's Sacrifice. In the book, the final battle between Harry Potter and Lord Voldemort is not about strength, power, or even revenge. It is about the collapse of an ideology, the quiet, inevitable defeat of a man who tried to defy death itself. When Harry walks into the Great Hall after surviving the killing curse, he is not a warrior looking for blood. He is a survivor carrying the weight of countless lives lost. Around him, the air is heavy with silence, broken only by the whispers of the wounded and the cries of those mourning the fallen. Voldemort stands there, skeletal and trembling, surrounded by the very people he has spent a lifetime terrorizing. Yet for the first time, it is not fear that fills the room. It is anticipation. Everyone senses that this confrontation is no longer about magic. It is about the truth. The moment Harry speaks to him, calling him Tom Riddle, the room seems to hold its breath. He strips away the myth, the grandeur, and the terror that Voldemort built around his name. In that instant, Voldemort is no longer the immortal Dark Lord, but a frightened man trapped by his own obsession. Harry's words are calm, almost compassionate, when he asks if Voldemort will show remorse. It is a question that exposes everything: the futility of Voldemort's life, the emptiness of his victories, the inevitability of his end. Rowling writes that Voldemort was screaming in the high voice he had when angered, but Harry remains steady, not triumphant, simply resolute. The boy who once trembled before this man now faces him with pity. This moral strength defines the end of Harry's journey. He has come full circle, from the frightened orphan in the cupboard under the stairs to the man who chooses mercy over vengeance. The battle is not fought with spells flying and walls crumbling. It unfolds with quiet conviction. The Elder Wand, which Voldemort believes answers to him, refuses to obey because its true loyalty lies with Harry. The moment the final curse rebounds, it is not a spectacle of destruction. It is a revelation of justice. Tom Riddle hit the floor with a mundane finality, Rowling writes, and that simplicity is the point. Evil dies not in flames or explosions, but in silence, defeated by its own arrogance. In contrast, the film adaptation transforms this ending into a cinematic showdown. The Great Hall, filled with witnesses in the book, is empty. The moral conversation between Harry and Voldemort vanishes, replaced by an action sequence of flying debris and collapsing towers. The duel sprawls across the castle, turning into a chase that feels more like a superhero movie than a conclusion to a philosophical story. Voldemort's body dissolves into ashes, carried away by the wind. It looks dramatic, but it lacks the weight of the written version. There is no moment of reckoning, no moral choice. It becomes a victory of spectacle rather than soul. The difference lies in the tone. In the book, the final confrontation happens in daylight, in front of everyone, teachers, students, Death Eaters, and the families of the fallen. It is a public unmasking. The audience sees that the man who inspired so much fear is merely human. His death is not glorious, but pitiful. It is a warning about the emptiness of a life devoted to power. In the film, the duel takes place in isolation, emphasizing Harry's physical triumph rather than his spiritual one. By making it a personal fight, the adaptation loses the essence of what Rowling was trying to say, that Voldemort's defeat belongs to everyone who chose love, not fear. Harry's refusal to kill is perhaps the most profound act in the entire series. He disarms Voldemort but does not cast the killing curse. This choice echoes Dumbledore's lessons throughout the books, that power is not the ultimate goal, and mercy is a greater strength than domination. In the film, however, this nuance disappears. Harry's confrontation becomes a battle of equals, as if the outcome depends on skill rather than moral clarity. The book's Harry wins because he understands something Voldemort never could, that death is not the enemy. As Dumbledore once told him, "Do not pity the dead, Harry, pity the living, and above all those who live without love." This thematic core, the acceptance of mortality, gives the ending its quiet power. Voldemort's downfall is his refusal to understand this truth. He divides his soul, murders to cheat death, and in doing so destroys his own humanity. When his curse rebounds in the Great Hall, it is poetic justice. He dies by his own hand, the victim of his final lie. Rowling's decision to make this death ordinary is deliberate. There is no grandeur, no theatrical exit. Evil fades in a whisper, not a roar. Voldemort fell backward, arms splayed, the slit pupils of the scarlet eyes rolling upward. The horror of that simplicity reminds the reader that true evil ends not with drama but with emptiness. The film's choice to make Voldemort disintegrate into dust robs the story of that message. Turning him into ashes makes him look almost mythic, as if he vanishes into legend rather than collapsing as a mortal man. It gives him a strange dignity he does not deserve. The book insists on his humanity, on the physicality of his corpse lying on the floor. It is the ultimate irony, and the man who feared death most of all becomes a lifeless body among the many he created. Harry, on the other hand, walks away quietly, refusing to celebrate. His victory is not joyful but solemn. He understands that the end of Voldemort does not erase the suffering that came before. Rowling also makes sure that the final duel belongs to the collective, not the individual. The Great Hall is filled with witnesses who see justice served. Neville stands among them, holding the sword of Gryffindor after slaying Nagini. Molly Weasley has just killed Bellatrix Lestrange. The unity of these characters symbolizes that Voldemort's defeat is not Harry's alone. It is the culmination of countless acts of courage. In the film, isolating the duel erases this sense of shared triumph. By narrowing the focus to Harry and Voldemort's personal struggle, it reduces the story's humanity to a single moment of combat. The book's narrative rhythm also builds toward emotional stillness rather than chaos. After the battle, the silence of the Great Hall mirrors the calm after a storm. Harry's first act is to comfort others to ensure that the dead are honoured. He walks past the bodies of Lupin, Tonks and Fred, acknowledging the cost of victory. The film skips much of this mourning, cutting straight to celebration. That emotional shortcut makes the ending feel abrupt. The viewer never gets to feel the weight of what was lost. In contrast, Rowling's ending allows space for grief, showing that even victory can be heavy with sorrow. There is also something deeply biblical in the book's conclusion. The fallen hero who lays down his life for others returns, not as a conqueror, but as a redeemer. Harry's willingness to die becomes the moral hinge of the entire story. When he faces Voldemort in the forest, he does not resist. He embraces death, trusting that love will protect those he leaves behind. This act of self-sacrifice breaks Voldemort's curse on Hogwarts and weakens the Dark Lord's magic. By choosing death, Harry achieves the one thing Voldemort could not: peace. The film touches on this theme but buries it beneath action and visual effects, missing the quiet transcendence that defines the novel's final chapter. Even small details reveal this philosophical contrast. In the book, when the final curse rebounds, Rowling writes that the wand flew from Voldemort's hand and spun through the air, and Harry caught it. That single moment carries a lifetime of symbolism, and the power of destruction now rests in the hands of someone who refuses to use it. In the film, that meaning is overshadowed by a flurry of CGI. The beauty of moral restraint becomes a spectacle of falling stones. It is as though the film does not trust silence to carry emotion, though silence is precisely what makes the ending unforgettable. One of the most haunting images in the book is how ordinary Voldemort's death appears. There is no scream that echoes across the castle, no blinding light. His body fell to the floor with a mundane finality, Rowling repeats, emphasizing that the great terror of wizarding Britain ends not with power, but with fragility. It is an image of decay, of a man undone by his own choices. In that ordinariness lies the ultimate punishment, to die as he lived, alone and unloved. The film, however, transforms that quiet end into a visual metaphor of purification, ashes blowing away, as if the universe itself cleanses his existence. It is beautiful to look at, but it betrays the deeper meaning of his defeat. In the novel, Harry's victory is not about proving superiority, but about understanding. He learns that magic without love is meaningless, that death without acceptance is terror. Voldemort dies a prisoner of his own mind, trapped by his fear. The film, for all its visual grandeur, cannot capture that subtlety. It ends where the book begins to speak, like at the intersection of life, death, and compassion. Rowling's version reminds us that the greatest triumphs are often invisible, that mercy can be more powerful than violence. The adaptation, in its pursuit of spectacle, forgets that truth. What remains on screen is not the end of an ideology, but the end of a villain reduced to dust in the wind. And perhaps that is the saddest transformation of all, the loss of the moral heart that made Harry Potter more than just a story of magic. Number 23, Horcruxes without logic. In the fifth book, Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, everything begins to turn around a single, mysterious sentence. The prophecy whispered by Sybil Trelawney in the back room of the Hog's Head. The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord approaches, born to those who have thrice defied him, born as the seventh month dies. It was not a riddle for an adventure movie. It was the thread that wove together fate, choice, and consequence. In the book, J.K. Rowling turns this prophecy into the beating heart of the entire series, a moral paradox wrapped in tragedy. Yet when the story was brought To the screen, this entire philosophy was replaced with a simple visual, a glowing glass orb and a few cryptic words that never fully land. The film gives a spectacle but strips away the idea that defined Harry's very existence. In the book, Dumbledore's explanation to Harry after Sirius's death is one of the most profound moments in the entire saga. He tells him that the prophecy was only true because Voldemort believed it. It means, "Neither can live while the other survives," Dumbledore says gently. But it was Voldemort who made it so. Rowling's narrative forces readers to grapple with the notion of self-fulfilling destiny. Voldemort's obsession with power drives him to mark Harry as his equal, unknowingly giving him a fragment of his own soul. The choice to kill a child becomes the seed of his downfall. That is what makes the prophecy powerful. It's not a prediction of the future, but a mirror reflecting the choices people make when they try to outrun it. In contrast, the film leaves this moral reflection behind. When Dumbledore and Harry meet in his office after the battle at the Department of Mysteries, there's no quiet unpacking of meaning, no conversation about fate versus choice. The film ends almost abruptly, as if the prophecy were merely a trinket lost among the shattered orbs of the hall. The book's Hall of Prophecy scene is heavy with symbolism. Each glass sphere represents a potential destiny, countless futures that might never be realized. When Harry finally holds the orb bearing his name, the reader senses the weight of all those unspoken possibilities. It's not simply about his destiny, but about how fragile and interchangeable fate can be. Rowling writes that Harry's hands were trembling as the glass sphere glowed slightly in the dim light, as though he were holding the sum of his life's meaning. But in the movie, this moment becomes an action set piece. The sphere glows, the Death Eaters close in, and the orb shatters. There's no wait, no silence, no pause for understanding. The prophecy becomes a background object in a chaotic battle scene, a missed opportunity to communicate one of the series' most intelligent ideas. The loss is especially striking because this prophecy explains why Voldemort is who he is. In the novel, Dumbledore patiently unfolds the story. Voldemort heard only part of the prophecy and assumed it referred to Harry, not Neville Longbottom, who was also born at the end of July. In that single act of choice, the decision to target one boy over another, Voldemort shapes his own fate. Dumbledore's words are chilling. It was, I think, the most terrible mark of all. He chose the boy he thought most like himself. This detail reveals Voldemort's inner weakness, his inability to see beyond his own reflection. In the film, however, this idea is lost entirely. The movie never clarifies that the prophecy could have applied to Neville, nor that Voldemort's choice is the very thing that binds him to Harry. As a result, the story loses its moral depth, turning the prophecy from a tragedy of choice into a cliché about destiny. It's difficult to understand why the filmmakers abandoned this narrative richness. The scene between Harry and Dumbledore at the end of Order of the Phoenix could have been one of the most emotionally intelligent sequences in the entire franchise. It was an opportunity to explore Harry's existential crisis, his fear of becoming the very thing he fights against. Rowling writes that Harry's voice shakes as he says, "So it's me, I've got to kill him, because he's not going to rest until he kills me." And Dumbledore answers not with comfort but with truth. "You are protected in ways you cannot imagine." The book turns this exchange into a lesson on moral responsibility. The film, by comparison, cuts it short and moves on to the next visual beat. The viewer leaves with no sense of why this prophecy matters, only that it exists. When one looks closely, the prophecy isn't about death at all. It's about the illusion of control. Voldemort's attempt to master fate creates the very destiny he seeks to avoid. Harry's existence becomes proof that love, the force Voldemort dismisses as weakness, rewrites the laws of destiny itself. In the book, this theme builds naturally. Harry's survival as a baby, his visions of Voldemort's mind, his struggle with anger and isolation, all of it ties back to the prophecy's core idea. Every action Voldemort takes to prevent his defeat strengthens the bond that leads him to it. The film, unfortunately, fails to convey this web of cause and effect. Without Dumbledore's philosophical framing, the prophecy becomes just another mystery item, like a Horcrux or a time-turner with no emotional spine connecting it to the story's heart. There's also a tonal problem. In the book, the Department of Mysteries is exactly that, a place where the boundaries between knowledge and mystery blur. The prophecies whisper, the brain room hums with eerie life, and the battle unfolds like a dream collapsing in on itself. It's the most surreal chapter in the series. The film turns it into a glossy fight sequence drenched in blue light. The haunting strangeness of Rowling's world, where the magical and the philosophical coexist, is traded for visual clarity. The prophecy shatters, and with it so does the subtle tension between knowledge and ignorance that defines this part of the story. The audience sees magic, but not mystery. By simplifying the prophecy, the film also diminishes Dumbledore's complexity. The book reveals that he has known the full truth for years but kept it from Harry out of love and fear. His guilt is palpable. "I cared about you too much," he admits. This is Dumbledore at his most human, a man torn between wisdom and weakness. The omission of this revelation in the movie flattens his character, leaving him as a wise old mentor instead of a deeply flawed guardian. It's one of the greatest emotional exchanges in the books. Yet it's barely hinted at on screen. The audience never witnesses Dumbledore's confession or Harry's anguish, robbing their relationship of the painful honesty that defines it. The difference between book and film reveals something about adaptation itself. Rowling wrote her story like a moral labyrinth. The films often chose to pave it into a straight road. The prophecy isn't just a plot point, it's the thesis of the entire saga. It's about the power of choice, the curse of obsession, and the beauty of free will. By turning it into an object to be broken, the film loses the intellectual depth that made Harry Potter more than a fantasy for children. "It was your heart that saved you," Dumbledore says later in Half-Blood Prince, but the seeds of that truth were planted in the prophecy. Seeds the film barely allows to grow. The scene of the broken prophecy in the movie looks grand, but the silence that follows means nothing. In the book, the shattering of the orb is tragic. It represents the loss of understanding. The glass sphere slipped from Harry's fingers and smashed on the floor, Rowling writes, and the whispering stopped abruptly. It's a haunting image, knowledge disappearing before it can be grasped. The film captures the image, but not the meaning. The destruction of the prophecy becomes just another effect in the chaos. The audience doesn't feel the weight of what has been lost. The idea that the future is not fixed, that the real danger lies in believing it is. Neville's absence in the prophecy's context is another fatal omission. In the book, his presence gives the story an aching irony. The boy who could have been the chosen one grows into a quiet hero through his own choices, not destiny. His bravery stands as silent proof that prophecy does not make heroes, decisions do. The film reduces him to a secondary figure in the background. By removing his connection to the prophecy, the movie erases one of the saga's most poignant parallels: two children, shaped by loss, one chosen by fate, the other by circumstance. It's almost poetic that Voldemort himself misunderstands the prophecy he kills to protect. In the book, he destroys everything, Lily, James, countless others, for a destiny that only exists because he believes in it. He heard the prophecy and he acted upon it, Dumbledore explains. Thus he gave it meaning. That single line encapsulates the entire moral architecture of Rowling's universe. Evil is not born from darkness alone. It grows in the spaces where fear replaces reason. The film, focused on battles and wand sparks, never slows down long enough to let that truth breathe. There's something haunting about how the prophecy fades from the films after Order of the Phoenix. It's mentioned in passing, but its emotional power never returns. The movies move forward, but without that central moral axis. By the time Voldemort meets his end, the story has forgotten that he was undone, not by destiny, but by his own choices. The book reminds us of this constantly. It is our choices, Harry, that show what we truly are, far more than our abilities. That line, spoken years earlier, finds its full meaning in the prophecy's philosophy. The films, however, seem to forget their own soul. Perhaps the strangest irony is that the prophecy's true message mirrors the process of adaptation itself. Rowling's words were open to interpretation, but the filmmakers, like Voldemort, tried to control fate, to simplify meaning, to define it in absolute terms. In doing so, they lost the delicate ambiguity that made the story powerful. The prophecy was never meant to be literal. It was a metaphor for human agency. The idea that destiny is both real and imagined, depending on how much we believe in it. The film treats it as an object to be destroyed, but the book treats it as an idea that must be understood. And that difference, subtle yet monumental, is why the prophecy in the movie lost its soul.